So you'll see what you think of it.
Okay, so
Take it away.
talking about the Fermi paradox, the two most influential figures in this field, I believe, are Enrico Fermi, and he was a nuclear physicist in the 60s, and he developed the first nuclear reactor. And the paradox's basic premise is that there's a high probability that there is life in the universe or in our galaxy, but the presumption is that till this day we haven't been able to communicate or interact with this sentient life somewhere else. And Nikolai Kardashev is a nuclear physicist from the Soviet Union, and his main theory was that civilization goes through these different types or stages, starting off at type 0, which is basically civilization in its infancy, going all the way up to type 3. A civilization at type 1 has harnessed all the power that its host planet can provide, and I will explain that here. So a type 1 civilization is, again, a civilization which harnesses the entire power of its host planet. A type 2 would be a civilization that can harness the entire power of its mother star. So this can be accomplished through something from sci-fi called a Dyson Sphere. So the Dyson Sphere is essentially a cluster of satellites, probes, certain devices that can effectively extract large amounts of the sun's energy, or the star in question's energy, to be useful for the civilization in question. Now, type 3 civilization would then become a civilization that is able to colonize the entire galaxy that they're a part of. So for us, it would be the Milky Way. It also goes up to type 4 and 5. Type 4 would be a civilization that can conquer, control, and extract energy from the entire universe. And type 5 would be a civilization that can extract energy from multiple universes. That's beyond the realm of realistic physics for now. So humanity on the scale, right now, we're predicted to be about 0.73 on the scale, around here, and it's going to take another 100 to 200 years before we're effectively able to extract all the energy from the Earth. But to transition to type 2, or even type 3, it's going to take monumentally longer, such as a few thousand to 100,000 to a few million years. So one of the big problems scientists think that the transition from a type, 0 civilization, which is where we are around now, to a type 1 civilization will be something called a Malthusian catastrophe. And this is basically the point at which population growth outpaces the production of food, or the resources that the planet can provide. And this is represented in multiple things, such as on Earth. If we are able to extract too much energy to the point where the temperature of the planet will increase beyond the point that's capable of supporting life. The marine ecosystems will degrade. There's not going to be enough food produced for the population. And that will lead to the whole-scale destruction of the entire civilization. And I'll touch on this more later in the presentation. But this is generally considered one of the first, barriers to humanity or any civilization in general, potentially taking the next step forward on the scale of evolution. So here is just a general study or map regarding the exploration that humans have undertaken in researching the different domains of space. So by this I mean, humans are much more easily able to detect high energy signals from distant galaxies because they're able to travel farther and for a longer period of time before getting dispersed. And this diagram basically represents that of the higher energy sectors of the observable universe and in our immediate galaxies, we have researched thoroughly most of it. And based off these findings so far, we can conclude that in our local universe, which is around 90 billion light years across, that there's no type 3 civilizations. And this is due to the fact that if there was one, we'd probably see the evidence of that, resulting in the mass colonization of a galaxy or energy signals, or something similar to that. And in October 2015, there was a study found by NASA where they found a star that was dimming around 22% at a time, and many sci-fi fanatics thought it was evidence of type 2 civilization or Dyson Sphere, but there were many irregularities in that there was no conclusive evidence if it was a Dyson Sphere, but it was more probable that it was just a string of comets. But this led many people and sci-fi fanatics to, hypothesize that it'd be very unlikely that in this one part of the solar system at this one time that we're looking at, there's like this mass storm of comets doing a giant star by 22%. And a planet that big would have to be multiple sizes bigger than the size of Jupiter. So, and in relatively close proximity to the sun. So, the one way that scientists hypothesize that we can colonize our own galaxy or galaxies in general would be through the construction of these probes called Bracewell von Neumann probes, and it's basically a mathematician that designed this idea that you generate this probe, you create this probe, and it basically has the same function of bacteria. So it has the same instructions to replicate, and it has a program that allows it to do so. So essentially you launch this into space, it'll reach an asteroid or something, it'll mine, collect resources, extract, replicate itself, and then go on to colonize other planets. And the reason it's important to think about collecting resources from asteroids is there's no point in going straight from Earth to another planet, because we spent all this energy escaping from the Earth's gravity well that there's no point in entering the gravity of another planet to repeat the entire process over. It's much more lucrative, some believe, to extract these very expensive minerals and resources from these asteroids and low gravity objects to be able to replicate these Bracewell von Neumann probes to be able to expand our society even further. Okay, so it is generally thought that the whole-scale colonization of the Milky Way should have been achieved in around 2 million years, and that's like peanuts in the terms of the whole age of the universe, the whole age of the Milky Way, and the age of the Earth, which is around 4.3 billion years old. So the main, I guess, premise, which is explained by the probes that I just talked about, is that there's an exponential increase from when probes are launched from the home planet. So this would be, for example, Earth. We colonize our neighbors, for example, and the terraforming aspect of this I'll get into later, but this is just assuming that they're able to colonize every single planet in question and take over the entire universe in about 4 million years. These are obviously just estimates based off what technology we have, what technology we think humanity can achieve, but these are no way grounded in, I guess, pure fact. There's always a chance of estimation in these results. So here's I guess a heat map, and this is showing, for example, a simulation of 3D space. And all of these are planets, and here's where any civilization will start, and these are unclaimed planets. So this basically shows that after reaching a steady space, so the civilization in question will not continue to accelerate in its colonization. It'll continue to colonize around 0.27 planets per time period discussed in this paper, and this basically just shows that over time, even though some planets are skipped, this could be due to factors such as the nature of habitability of the planet, or if other paths occur that allow greater expansion in the long term. So by this could be indicative of something like a planet like Venus. If humans were to colonize Venus, sure, it would be a great addition to our land, but the basic problem is that the environment and the atmosphere is very, very lethal and deadly to humans. So the amount of energy that would be required is way higher than what we would get back in terms of benefits. Also due to the fact that Venus is a lot smaller of a planet. Okay, and these are just basically findings from the study. They basically found that when stellar motions are accounted for, all planets in the galaxy are usually settled in less time than the age of the galaxy itself. And that even though some densities or some of the colonization isn't close to zero, there's still there's still possibilities. For example, for Earth, that we could be in one of those pockets in which, let me just go back, one of these green pockets that wasn't filled in. For example, if there's no useful resources or technology or materials nearby, for example, in Earth, in our local solar system, it is possible that a Type 3 civilization might have just skipped over us because we're pretty useless, right? So, okay, so now we get into this thing called a Drake equation. And basically this was developed in the 1960s as a way of hypothesizing the number of potential planets and civilizations we could encounter, and that depends on the number of stars formed in the galaxy, and these are formed in nebulae, which are star nurseries, and the number of stars with planetary systems, and that ranges from 1 to 5 if a star does have planets, and the number of planets per solar system. And these factors depend on the range of where the planet sits within the solar system, if it's able to support life or not. And if the civilization or planets in question are on our light path. So if they're within the domain of which, when the planet was developed, enough time has passed for the light of this planet to reach us, or the presence of the civilization to reach us. Because everything in the universe has finite speed. So, yeah. So, here's just the same thing re-explained, and based off this, all this math, initial estimates range that within our observable universe, within our local supercluster of galaxies, there's around 20 planets at minimum that can support life. But if you increase all these parameters, because this is science and the field of astronomy is always increasing and expanding, we can see that there's around 50 million potential life bearing planets in our supercluster. Another hypothesis is that it isn't really possible to have life anywhere else. And this is due to the fact of a whole cascade of different events that have come together in Earth's history, some of which are listed on the right here. So stuff like the formation of the atmosphere, tectonic plates, the fact that animal cells have developed once on Earth in the entire history of that we know of, but never again. The whole fact that life has come into existence once on Earth, but never again. So these are all things that have happened basically once, like tectonic plates, stuff like that. Those I'd say contribute less so, but these are all big factors that many would argue that contribute to Earth being very unique. But the only problem with this is that I feel like it gives humans a big sense of entitlement, that we're like the only important thing in the universe. And perhaps we're the only sentient beings within our local galaxy, but we won't know that for sure. And using these parameters I just discussed, if we use this equation, the Drake equation I just discussed, it basically results in a value of 0, in that we're basically alone in the universe. So if we use a statistical method to analyze this equation, this was done in the 60s, so it's a bit out of date because this is an older method. This is the first method that they used to determine if there was life in distant galaxies. We determined that the nearest extraterrestrial civilization is around 1,300 light years away from us, which is still pretty far. I don't think anyone is trying to plan missions to other solar systems, let alone just Mars right now, so. Okay, and these are just a whole cascade of similar Earth-like planets. This is the Kepler system. This was discovered, I think, around 2015. More noticeable is the TRAPPIST system. I don't know if many of you heard of that. NASA published a big finding of this in 2017, and they were really hyped because there are 6 Earth-like planets, and they're all within the Goldilocks zone, I guess, of their star, and they could all support life. The near ones, they found that didn't have a large atmosphere, which is great because it's less likely that they're Earth giants and have big greenhouse effects. So here, yeah, so Earth exists in this thing called the conservative habitable zone, and it's basically the most optimal conditions for supporting life, but it's also possible for life to exist in these exoplanets within the optimistic habitable zone. You can see that Venus is outside this area, but Mars is still within this conservative habitable zone. Sorry. I'll touch on this more later. And here, so we can see within 0 to 80 light years, there's around 20 planets, 20 exoplanets that we found that support life. But the fact of the matter is that this is still in light years, and the initial estimates have suggested the colonization of other planets in a galaxy would take 500 to a few thousand years. So I feel like these findings go directly against that, but also this doesn't take into account habitable planets within our own star system or in nearby solar systems. And this is the same thing. This data is the same, but it represents exoplanets that are significantly farther from Earth. So we found a big cluster of them within 100 light years, but the rest of them seem to be a lot farther out, so, possibly in a different segment of the galaxy. So here's some iconic images. I think everyone knows what this is. This is the golden record on the Voyager 1 and 2 probe, and I guess it was an attempt by humanity to interact with or talk to potentially any intelligent life in the universe, but it was a pretty futile attempt at that because there's just these 2 small probes whizzing through space that no one's ever going to find. But they basically attempt to describe all of humanity on the encoded data and on the surface. For example, the location of where we are in the Milky Way, the revolutions to which to turn this disk to be able to generate the code that could be deciphered into images. And these images contain, I guess, a whole representation of humanity. People from all around the world, cultures, basically everything that makes us human is attempted to be represented on the data on this disk. And this thing on the side is more of a this thing is called the Arecibo Message, and it was created in the 70s from this big telescope in Puerto Rico. And this was another, I guess, symbolic attempt to communicate with aliens. It was shot at a distant sharp star cluster, which is around 22,000 light years away. So there's no way that we'll ever know if anyone got this for another like 40,000 years, because the message has to travel back. But basically, the point of this message is to encode everything about humans in a basic sense, because it has the number system here, basic elements, all the nucleotides, where we are, number of base pairs in our body, the size of the human, and the size of the sending Arecibo telescope. So basically everything's encoded in here, and the likelihood that someone's able to uncode this, even like if you told someone what this is pretty unlikely. Okay, so now I get to the main topic of, I guess the main bread and butter of this presentation, which is the great filters. So the great filters are these things that Enrico Fermi believed would prevent the formation of these different civilizations. So the great filter is basically this obstacle in which a civilization or society just cannot overcome, and that leads to death and destruction and the whole-scale devastation of that world. So a great filter behind us could have been something like what I discussed earlier, the development of life in complex animal cells. We know that there are building blocks for life on different planets. In one of, I think Saturn's moons, Titan, they think that there's all these hydrocarbons and they're going to send a spacecraft there, but the possibility of life existing is potentially very low. And that's what people think of a great filter being behind us would be. And on contrast, a great filter in front of us would be something that no society, no civilization so far has been able to get past. So an example of this would be something like climate change, an unfriendly AI, as we discussed in this course. This would be similar to grand challenges that we face as a species, as Dr. Solez has talked about earlier. Stuff like new technology. When the first nuclear bomb was detonated, there was a chance that it was going to light the entire atmosphere on fire, and scientists believed this at the time. Thank God it didn't, because we wouldn't be here, right? But there are potentials for these technologies to result in large whole-scale devastation later on. There's also potential that there is a tier 3 civilization lurking somewhere, but we just aren't advanced enough to interact with it. An example of this would be something like humans going into a forest, cutting down trees, right? We're destroying the environment and the homes of squirrels, but for us, we're just building houses. Like, the squirrels are just there, right? If we're just so insignificant, what makes us think that we're not so insignificant in the whole scale of the universe, that there isn't something much larger than us that's just, I guess, not paying attention to us? Okay, so briefly what I just talked about, finding other life forms, such as bacteria on Mars, or I guess more complex organisms on moons of Titan or distant exoplanets. This could be very bad for us, and it's more likely that a great filter lies in front of us, because if life has developed to that point, in our observable universe, in what we've observed so far, what makes it so that life hasn't evolved past that, and civilizations haven't expanded past that and have been destroyed? Because there would have been some recognizable factor signature that we would be able to analyze. It's also a contrary point to this would be if there is intelligent life elsewhere in the galaxy, or life in general, that humans should be more empathetic to it and be able to open and accept it more into our circle of empathy, similar to how AI would be on our planet in the future. But the fact that these technologies and these societies would then exist would then, I think, lead to future conflicts. Stephen Hawking once discussed that it'd be very foolish and foolhardy of us for us to, I guess, try and talk with these advanced civilizations, because what if they just end up destroying us like humans have done to their own selves, the own aboriginal populations of different parts of the world? We're just, I guess, indigenous habitants of Earth. So what if there's a big civilization that comes and just, I don't know, just annihilates us? And here we can talk about different world wars and genocides, and how these have led to mass casualties, and these are just the number of deaths per thousands resulted from, I guess, genocides in the 40s and different civil wars and conflicts. So if there was a stronger, I guess, more omnipotent civilization, they would obviously not act too kindly towards us, or on the contrary, we could be so useless or not pose as much as a risk to these civilizations or other beings that we might just be left alone. Dr. Solez's trainees in the 70s, he went to the Amazon, this very secluded part of the world, and he thought he benefited from interacting with these indigenous people of the Amazon rainforest. So I feel like there's lots that humanity can contribute to a potential galactic civilization. There's also a lot humanity could potentially gain. But there's also a possibility that, you know, we are alone, and the whole world is the only place that has life, and the rest of the galaxy is devoid of life, right? And that's basically it for my talk. And you know, this is just a brief figure that shows where we are and where we could potentially view it and interpret data from future and past light cones. These are basically areas in which we observe the universe to be in different states. So basically these are search spaces, and this is what we can search for when we're searching for different civilizations. So I'm done.